What's up gamers, Lexu here with my Shadow Step Rogue build guide for Diablo 4. The Shadow Step Rogue is the best build within the class to speed farm Torment 4 activities and the pit. This build is pure speed, featuring an infinite Shadow Step that teleports the rogue and kills enemies to zoom through maps. The Shadow Step Rogue build is perfect for quickly clearing nightmare dungeons to farm Obdurcite. You only really need to stop at elites and bosses to pick up the materials, while Shadow Step leapfrogs you from enemy to enemy. Even though this build is the best choice for speed farming, it's not as powerful as Death Trap or Rain of Arrows for pushing higher tiers of the pit. I've still been able to easily clear pit tier 100, so the build can be used to max out your glyphs. With the armory feature, you can instantly switch between different builds specialized for each activity, so the Shadow Step Rogue is worth having in your arsenal. In this video, I'll be covering the build mechanics, skill rotation, and then the entire build setup, including skills, gear, and Paragon. If you're playing in Season 7, there's a section for seasonal witchcraft powers and occult gems. Keep watching until the end of the video for bonus gameplay footage of a pit tier 90 speedrun, cleared in only 1 minute and 43 seconds. Let's go over the key build mechanics for the Shadow Step Rogue. The only starting requirement for the build is enough cooldown reduction for Shadow Step to achieve infinite cast without delay. The default 9-second cooldown in the tooltip needs to be lowered to at least 3.25 seconds through gear and Paragon. The newly added Assassin Stride is the best source of mobility cooldown reduction, providing up to 56.7%. Once the tooltip cooldown is 3.25 seconds or lower, Discipline Shadow Step then further reduces the cooldown by 3 seconds on cast. I added the remaining 0.25 seconds to the cooldown requirement to account for the attack animation frames of Shadow Step. Now that you have a spammable Shadow Step, let's talk about scaling its damage. Most of the damage output in this build comes from the Shadow Clone instead of directly from the Rogue. The Season 7 patch updated the Shadow Clone to count as a summon and receive the Rogue's damage bonuses. There are still some interactions that don't work with the Shadow Clone. For this build, the only benefit the Shadow Clone isn't receiving is weapon mastery. The clone still ends up being more powerful due to a rank 7 Shadow Clone dealing 116% of your damage, a rank 4 Unto Dawn providing 60% increased damage, and a newly added weapon temper granting Shadow Clone double damage. Since the Shadow Clone is dealing the majority of your damage output, it should be recast every 15 seconds. The cooldown of my Shadow Clone is reduced to 31 seconds with the resource temper, and then the remaining cooldown is reduced by Yol Crack's Runewood. After casting a skill with a cooldown 8 times, which includes the spammable Shadow Step, all energy will be consumed. The 100 maximum energy consumed is enough to activate Preparation to reduce Shadow Clone cooldown by 5 seconds. After consumption, energy can be regained by Innovation or Restore Resource Weapon Affix to repeat the cycle. If you don't have the Vessel of Hatred expansion to access these runes, you need a Harlequin Crest to reduce Shadow Clone cooldown instead. Another benefit in the Season 7 update is a fix to close quarters combat, allowing the legendary bonuses on turf and closer glyphs to scale it correctly. You should be able to gain about a 4 times damage multiplier on close quarters combat with the glyphs and offensive tempers. The basic skill rotation to clear groups of enemies can be simplified to casting Shadow Clone every 15 seconds and Heartseeker every 8 seconds to fulfill the marksman requirement of close quarters combat. Once those essential buffs are active, simply hold down the Shadow Step button while hovering over enemies. Shadow Step can be chained to the next enemy without releasing the button. Refresh Darkshroud when needed to gain damage reduction and 10% crit chance. Dash when there are no enemies to target with Shadow Step. For maximum damage output against bosses and tough elites, cast Smoke Grenade to apply the enhanced effect and activate Pit Fighter's Gall. Drink a potion to activate the final damage bonus from unstable elixirs. Moving on to the sections for the entire build setup for the Shadow Step Rogue, let's start with the skill tree. Heartseeker is the marksman skill used to activate close quarters combat, while also providing additional attack speed and critical strike damage. No core skills are equipped in this build, but 3 points are required to allocate to unlock the next skill cluster. Sturdy is beneficial for close damage reduction. All the passives in my skill tree have an additional rank granted by an equipped Shroud of False Death. Shadow Step is the main damage dealer, so 5 skill points are allocated. The item contribution ranks come from Assassin Stride and Grasp of Shadow. Discipline Shadow Step is necessary to reduce the cooldown by 3 seconds. In Season 6, this was buffed to provide a 4 times damage multiplier. Dash is helpful when there are no enemies to jump to with Shadow Step. Remember that you don't allocate skill points for the ranks provided by item contribution, so Dash only has 1 skill point allocated. Methodical Dash allows for more usage. The Rogue has many beneficial passives to increase damage, and 3 skill points are invested into each of them, including Weapon Mastery, Unstable Elixirs, Trick Attacks, Exploit, Malice, and Frigid Finesse. Cowl the Nameless and an Amulet grant additional ranks to the most powerful passives. This unique helm is best in slot for damage due to Trick Attacks having the highest damage increase. Testing has shown that Trick Attacks is bugged for our benefit, causing each stack to be multiplicative with each other instead of additive. Frigid Finesse is the best passive available on an amulet due to the 10% damage increase to frozen enemies per level. The damage bonus is activated against elites by a lucky hit chance to freeze temper. Staggered bosses count as being affected by all crowd control types, so Frigid Finesse will automatically apply. Smoke Grenade is mainly used against elites and bosses to deal 25% increased damage to them. Dark Shroud provides damage reduction and 10% critical strike chance. Any leftover skill points can be used here. Shadow Imbuement has 5 skill points invested for better clearing ability. It's instantly applied to all enemies by Assassin Stride to gain 15% critical strike chance and 12% increased damage. Alchemical Advantage is only utilized if you have the Aura of Siphoning Witch power to deal poison damage. If you don't have a source of poison damage, reallocate these skill points into Dark Shroud and Agile instead. Shadow Clone is an important feature in the build and is increased to rank 7 with Vehement Brawler's aspect. Rank 4 Onto Dawn increases the Shadow Clone damage by 60%. Impetus is useful for the 20% increased damage to agility skills, which applies to Shadow Step. Unfortunately, Shadow Clone consumes this buff on cast without applying the bonus to their attacks. You need to move 15 meters after casting Shadow Clone to regain any benefit. Haste is only obtained for the attack speed portion that activates after energy is consumed by the Yorquax rune word. If you don't have Shroud of False Death equipped, reallocate a skill point from Dark Shroud to Innovation to regain energy. Finally, the key passive is Close Quarters Combat to provide 30% attack speed bonus and at least a 4 times damage multiplier. Let's go over the best in slot gear setup. A bow is preferred over a crossbow for a faster attack speed when casting Heartseeker. Damage to close enemies is used for all offensive tempers to scale Close Quarters Combat. Aim for a 100% chance for Shadow Clone to deal double damage. I only needed 2 masterworking bonuses here, but it just happened to triple crit. The Führer aspect stacks up to 200% increased ultimate damage on a 2-handed weapon. Yorquax is slotted to activate Preparation to reduce Shadow Clone cooldown. Daggers are preferred for the damage to close enemies implicit. These weapons are imprinted with Shadow Clone cleave damage for clearing groups of enemies. Retribution and Inner Calm aspects are imprinted. Shadow Step doesn't count as moving your character, so the full bonus for Inner Calm is granted while spamming it. A good amulet is the most difficult legendary item to obtain. The percent dexterity and ranks to Frigid Finesse are the most important affixes with about equal value. Unstable Elixirs is the second priority. I needed a Shadow Step cooldown temper here to bring it down to 3 seconds. Pit Fighter's Gall is equipped for its unique effect providing a 45% damage multiplier after casting Smoke Grenade. Only use one with a 6-second duration, as any less makes the rotation more difficult. You can also use 2 legendary rings instead, especially if you need more resistances or cooldown reduction tempers. I already met my Shadow Step cooldown requirement, so Shadow Clone cooldown reduction is tempered instead. Vehement Brawler's aspect is beneficial for both the damage increase and 2 additional ranks to Shadow Clone. If you use 2 legendary rings, then you can also imprint Cold Clip Aspect. Cowl of the Nameless is the best option for damage, if you can activate trick attacks by dazing or stunning enemies. Against bosses, you'll need them to summon ads for this helm to be worthwhile. Hair of Perdition can provide more consistent damage that works against all bosses. Harlequin Crest is also an option if you're struggling to lower cooldowns enough. The Notcry Rune Word groups enemies up so your Shadow Step Cleave and Shadow Imbuement explosions can hit them all. Shroud of False Death provides a massive damage increase with an additional rank to all passives. The damage after stealth isn't important since it doesn't apply to Shadow Clone. Mythic Uniques are difficult to find, so you might need to equip a legendary chest instead. Grasp of Shadow is highly recommended to increase the rank of Shadow Step and provide extra Shadow Clone attacks. My legendary pants have an armor affix and temper to reach the cap. The lucky hit chance to freeze temper is needed to activate Frigid Finesse. Frostbitten Aspect provides a damage increase in a utility slot. Assassin's Stride with a greater affix on mobility cooldown reduction is recommended. A triple masterworking bonus allows me to reduce Shadow Step cooldown enough to only require 1 temper on my amulet. The Paragon setup for the Shadow Step Rogue provides a massive amount of damage. Starting with the legendary nodes, Danse Macabre is activated and consumed by repeated casts of Shadow Step. No Witnesses grants 60% damage increase for 10 seconds after casting Shadow Clone. Shadow Clone cooldown can be reduced enough to keep this bonus active at all times. Tricks of the Trade provides 25% increased damage to Shadow Step after Heartseeker is cast. Cheap Shot is applied with all the stun, daze, and freeze included in the build. Damage to close enemies is the most important stat since it scales close quarters combat. The Turf Glyph provides an additive amount of damage to close enemies per strength, so obtain the strength nodes within its radius. Prioritize unlocking the legendary bonuses on Turf and Closer for multiplicative close damage. Control provides a higher damage increase when enemies are stunned or frozen. Headhunter is beneficial to increase dexterity nodes within its radius. Versatility boosts the ultimate damage nodes. The additional bonus applies to Shadow Step since it's not a basic or core skill. One last important note is the Acrobat nodes to reduce Shadow Step cooldown. My Winning Guide on Icy Veins shows the base setup that focuses on unlocking glyph sockets and legendary nodes. The remaining beneficial nodes can then be allocated as shown in the full setup. The Hired Mercenaries were here to provide increased damage with his Inspiration passive. Rahir's Aegis is extremely helpful for capping resistances. Don't forget to use a Soothing Spices incense to gain more resistances. You should get used to using the 3 different types of incense and an elixir at all times, as the crafting mats for them are plentiful. Variana is selected as the reinforcement. Bloodthirst provides attack speed if you haven't reached the first cap yet, or Ancient Harpoons can be used to pull enemies. If you're playing in Season 7, Witchcraft powers are available. Prinado provides a useful vortex to group enemies up. If you haven't found this lost power yet, any other unique witch power will do. Hex of Shattering reduces enemy damage. Breath of the Coven provides a massive attack speed bonus. Unfortunately, this bonus falls under attack speed cap number 1, so its benefit might be limited. All 3 stacks are granted by casting Shadow Clone near an enemy. The ultimate skill receives all 3 witchcraft tags from an occult gem. Soul Harvest increases dexterity for more damage and dodge chance. Aura of Siphoning provides poison damage to activate alchemical advantage. Aura Specialization provides multiplicative critical strike damage to enemies, despite the tooltip displaying an additive sign. I tested Grow and found that the damage bonus doesn't apply to Shadow Clone. I also discovered that Purging Touch doesn't increase Shadow Clone damage even when it receives the Eldritch tag. Eldor Sigil is the first occult gem you should craft for 25% increased damage to Shadow Step. Pointed Finger is next for the 15% increased Shadow Clone damage. Finally, Voice of the Stars increases Shadow Clone damage by 10% and also grants the free Witchcraft tags to fully activate Breath of the Coven. Please enjoy the rest of the gameplay footage. Be sure to check my written guide on Icy Veins, which will always be updated to have the most up-to-date build setup. If you learned something new in this video, you owe it to me to hit that subscribe button. You should also subscribe to see more of my Diablo 4 content. Until next time, peace out and happy slaying.